What sets SoulKeeper VR apart from other games in the genre, and what is the next step in its development?
SoulKeeper VR is a dark fantasy game, which is RPG and open world. You, as the main protagonist of the story, will go across the land, seek out dungeons, interact with a variety of characters, and fight many, many different enemies.
We try to incorporate all the traditional elements that people expect from such a game, from an open world RPG. But I would say that it stands apart from everything else because it's a lot more immersive being in VR. And of course, if we are to compare it with its VR competition, I would say we try to have a lot more interaction, and most importantly, we try to have a lot more realistic visuals because we believe that will have a much more immersive feel for the gamer.
We are currently in early access on Steam, but we are working on a new gameplay mechanics, new world, new story. So V2 right now is looking to be something to look forward to.
What are your thoughts on the current state of VR?
VR today, I think, is in a transition period. We saw a lot of wave shooters. We saw a lot of games that didn't try anything new, from my opinion, and I think we're starting to see that change.
I think VR is still early in its life cycle, and it's still growing. It's becoming more prevalent in households across the world, and I think that it'll continue to grow and become even more prevalent as the hardware becomes more accessible.
There was a lot of hype and anticipation and great expectations at first, and I believe for a while people felt that those expectations were not met. But still, I think that right now developers especially have a much more better understanding of what they have to do in order to achieve those expectations. I mean, it didn't pick up as fast as everybody expected it would, but I think that's for the best because it allows all of us, developers and the industry as well, to mature and prepare better for bigger things.
What is unique about developing a VR title?
I would say that one of the most important lessons for a developer to learn while working in VR is that you have to optimize a lot more than you would for any non-VR project. It's a lot harder because you have to pretty much hit those 90 frames per second that everybody expects you to, while you still want to provide and pretty much deliver the most realistic results. Because after all, I think that's the idea that sold VR the most, that people, players, users will be able to transfer themselves in a virtual world which looks almost as real as the actual world.
I think that a lot of the development is still highly experimental. We haven't quite hit a standard of how to handle certain things. And I think that's what's really exciting about VR today is that anyone can come out with something new and impressive.
What were some of the biggest challenges you faced working with VR?
I guess the most complex thing was finding what's the sweet spot for VFX for VR.
I'd have to say the dialogue system. It's very complex in trying to create a method that minimalizes the amount of UI needed while also engaging the player with many different options and ways to respond to the different characters that you were talking to.
From a business perspective, the fact that VR is still a small market makes it financially a lot more risky than non-VR gaming. There's a lot of unknown territory, so there's a lot of stuff you could do wrong as a developer, and that doesn't help either because you already have a small market to deal with, and if you lose a portion of that market, it makes it even harder. So I would say that the most challenging aspect of developing for VR is that you have to stay viable and alive long enough to make it.
What were the biggest design hurdles you encountered before using Articy Draft?
We used different and more traditional means for game documentation, game design documentation before Articy Draft, and of course, as every other developer could tell you, it was a nightmare. It was a lot of documents here and there, a lot of different files, whereas with Articy Draft you have a centralized system where you have all your assets, images, reference files, even maybe audio files top view orthographic maps, you know, all kinds of stuff. You can put it all in one central package, which is Articy Draft, and it's very well organized and very intuitive to use.
How is Articy Draft helping your production process?
I would say that Articy Draft is a very great way for us to communicate internally. I mean, it's one thing having a lot of good ideas, but it's another thing trying to communicate them to the rest of the team. Articy Draft, it's ideal to actually show your ideas to the team without putting a lot of effort. They have a very well organized structure for a whole bunch of different features within the game, and honestly, I wouldn't replace it for any other traditional game design tool.
Articy definitely helps with organization, and I believe that's key to any large-scale project. When you have organization like Articy provides when it comes to dialogue, locations, characters, their background stories, things like that, it's really nice to have all that information very organized and all in one place, and that it does it very well.
Do you have any advice for developers tackling a VR title?
Never put your first attempt in the game.
I think that keeping project scope in mind is always important. With large-scale games, it's easy to find yourself going down the rabbit hole, and sometimes you just need to pull back and remember that you have certain goals ahead of you.
First thing they should keep in mind is they should not do it for the money. I mean, it's a lot harder to make any money in it right now, and you definitely have to have a passion for VR, and you definitely have to be the type of person that wants to see VR succeed and become everything that everybody else wants it to become.